All right, so we're talking here about Chapter 2 on data, and what we are going to be just getting is a bunch of definitions here. So the beginning of the book, now we are to the point where we've talked about how to gather information, gather data, or create it through an experiment. But now what we're going to talk about is what do we do with that data? What are the things we can do, and specifically displaying the data and talking about the data. So data is systematically recorded information, whether numbers or labels, together with its context. Context, meaning the situation in which it was gathered. Note that data is plural and datum is singular. The context of the data can be described by answering the following questions, which are called the W's. Who was measured? Who are the people, your population? What was measured? What did you ask them? How were the data collected? Was it a random sample? Was it an experiment? Was it a survey? Where was the data collected? Sometimes you may not be able to answer this, but a lot of times you are able, especially if you're collecting the data. When was the study performed? Is this recent or is this from a long time ago? If you're trying to use data to support something that a new idea that you're coming up with, you want to use the most current information. So when is usually important, and why was the study performed? Now, of these questions, the first two are most important, who and what. So, in talking about the who. So, the who in most data tables, each row, these are rows go across. Each row corresponds to an individual that we're measuring. So, we've got Joe, Sally, the list of people, their names, okay? And then each column gives some characteristic of that individual. So each individual being measured is called a case. And the data values recorded about each individual are called observations. What, if we want to talk about what, okay, so who and what. Who, these are the people. The what are the columns, okay? What information are we getting? Those are the columns. So the rows tell us about the individual people, and the columns are the specific information we are gathering about those people. And those things are variables. So the characteristics recorded about each individual are called variables. These are recorded in the columns of the table. So a variable is any characteristic whose value may change from one individual to another. So, for example, in our problem up here, the variables would be height in inches. You have to write down how it's labeled. Hair color, and that's self-explanatory. Hair color. Brand of car. And number of siblings. Those are variables. Why? Because Joe can have a different answer for each of these than Sally. A few people will have the same height or the same color hair, but it's variable depending upon the person or individual you're talking about. There are two types, okay? There are two types of variables. Type 1, type 2, right down here. So, a variable is categorical or qualitative if the possible responses fall into categories. The categorical variables here would be hair color and brand of car. Because the answers fall into categories. A variable is quantitative or numerical if the possible responses measure the quantity of that variable. Measure how much? How many inches? So in this example up above, the height measured in inches and the number of siblings. Okay, I would say that quantitative or numerical values will always have a label, but like in the number of siblings, the label is number. I mean, it's just a number it represents, and you could say like 5 siblings, so yes, you usually have a label. All right, so on to the next page of notes, and this is really just some examples. Quantitative variables you really need to think about, because not all numbers are quantitative variables. So you really need to think, okay, you need to think about, okay, is every number that I gather for data a quantitative variable? It usually includes units, which tell how the variable was measured. For example, if you're told the weight of an animal is 12, you wouldn't know very much until you were informed of the units. So it is important that you include the units. But observations of categorical data are usually recorded with words, but they can also be recorded with numbers. Categorical zip codes are categorical. Why? They don't measure anything. Its zip code isn't really measuring anything. Living in that 85755 zip code isn't necessarily better than living in a different zip code, even though it's higher numerically. In cases like these, the numbers are just labels for different categories. In a way, zip code can tell you region of the country if you realize that on the East Coast they started with like 11 something and on the West Coast is 9 something. Note, many variables can be used as categorical or quantitative. For example, scores on the Ames test, I mean it would be kind of like our Iowa assessments, are recorded numerically, but also placed into categories such as meets and exceeds. That's the same way our Iowa assessments are. You get I'm in the 50th percentile, but you also get that I am, I am excel, I'm exceptional, I'm below average. So note, some variables are neither, such as your school ID number. It doesn't measure anything, so it isn't quantitative, and it can be considered categorical like zip codes, but there would only be one per category. These types of variables are called identifier variables. All right, so the who and the what, most important. But how is also very important. I always ask for the how, because I want to know, if I want to say cause and effect, I want to know that there was an experiment done. Okay, so how the data were collected is extremely important. The method of data collection, for example, a sample survey, an observational study, an experiment. Those are the main things that we have. We've either got a sample survey, observational study, or experiment. So those are really, if you're asked how, those are one of the ways. If it's not one of those ways, I'm not sure what it is. Okay, greatly influences the kinds of conclusions we can draw. So how we collected it. So if we do an experiment, we can probably say cause-effect for some population. If we do an observational study, on the other hand, we can't say cause-effect, we can say association. Okay, surveys, we could probably do something similar. Surveys a lot of times are like observational studies. Okay, where and when are things that you may not know, but it can make a big difference in what you decide or whether you decide to use your data. If you know that something is from 20 years ago, you're probably not going to use it right now. Okay, and president's job performance, I mean, here's just an example, depends on what region of the country you ask, or who you ask, or when, the time, like what's happening in America. All right, why? Knowing why the study was performed is also important. If a study reveals that Advil is the best pain reliever, but the study was performed by the makers of Advil, you should probably be suspicious. The purpose of the study was probably to help sell more medicine, not to be objective about pain relief. So they were probably just, I don't know, maybe they didn't do a really great experiment. Maybe they compared it to no medicine at all, a placebo. So in that case, it might not be the best. You have to want to look at why. Why did they do it and who did it? Okay, now, what we will be asked to do in our homework is you will be given a scenario and you will be asked to identify the W's, okay, identify the W's, the who, the what, the when, the how, the where, and the why. And I just usually put them down in whatever order they come to my head, so they don't have to be in a certain order. So we want to read this situation. We've got scientists at a major pharmaceutical firm. They conducted an experiment to study the effectiveness of a herbal compound to treat the common cold. They exposed each patient to a cold virus, then gave them either the herbal compound or a placebo. Several days later, they assessed each patient's condition using the cold severity scale, ranging from 0 to 5. They found no evidence of benefits of the compound. All right, so this is a scenario. We would like to know who were we finding information out about, okay? Now, there's a lot of who's in this. I mean, you could say who, pharmaceutical firm. Now, they're conducting the experiment, but there were other people involved. So you don't just want to say major pharmaceutical firm. The pharmaceutical firm itself exposed patients to a cold virus. So who, basically I would say patients exposed to cold virus. Why not pharmaceutical firm? Because they're just the people conducting the study, okay? They're not in the study. They're not having anything done to them. So we are dealing with patients that are being exposed to a cold virus. What are we doing? Well, we want to see if herbal compound can treat the common cold. And you could even add in here better than a placebo, better than nothing at all. Okay, when did they do it? We really don't know. We're not sure. Not sure. Okay, when? I'm not sure. I know it lasted over several days, but I don't know when they did it. Now, how did they do it? Well, they did an experiment. Now, you don't have to go into supreme details about how they did the experiment. They did an experiment. That's what you know. How do you know they did an experiment? Because they exposed patients to a cold virus, then gave them either an herbal compound or a placebo. I'm going to assume that they did it randomly. It doesn't expressly say that. I'm guessing they didn't get a pick. I want the placebo, please. So we're going to assume it was an experiment. Where did they do it? Pharmaceutical firm? We don't know if it was there or not. Not sure, but you could say pharmaceutical firm. I mean, that seems to be, maybe if they did it, maybe they did it there. That's a difficult word to spell, pharmaceutical. Okay, and why did they do it? Well, we kind of talked about it up here in the what. So, I mean, the why and the what can sometimes be similar things if you write the what well. We want to see if the herbal treatment is better. So you can basically just put an arrow up here in this case, because really that's why they did it. They wanted to see if that was better. Okay, now, the other thing that we would like to do, we identify the W's. Then the second thing, so that's number one, that's what we did here. Now we want to describe the variables. So the variables are things like, what did we have to find out? What information did we have to gather? What did we do? So we had an experiment and we had the treatment. So we had the treatments, and they were a placebo or an herbal compound. Okay, so the treatments, what they were getting, what we were giving them was actually, these are categorical variables. Okay, the treatments in the experiment were categorical. We either gave them a placebo or an herbal. They weren't given something that's numerical. And then we measured the cold severity on a scale of 0 to 5. And so in other words, there was some specified scale that we used, and that is going to be a quantitative. Okay, so we had the cold severity, this was the response variable. We had the explanatory variables, which were categorical, and the response variable, which was quantitative. And so that's, if you're not sure what the variables are, if you have an experiment, you know you've always got the explanatory and the response variable. Okay, so you've got those variables that you can describe. All right, moving on to the next page of notes. I'm going to stop the video here. I'm going to save this one and record it, and then there will be a second video over this Chapter 3 information.